The fire began in the harbor, where Roman warships burned under a sky choked with smoke. But it did not stay there. It crept inland like a living thing, carried by the wind and the chaos of war, until it reached the most precious place on earth, the Library of Alexandria, the great beating heart of human knowledge. And as the flames licked the stone walls and wooden doors, no one yet understood that what was being destroyed was not just paper and ink, but the memory of civilization itself, because inside those walls were the collected thoughts of thousands of years, scrolls brought from every corner of the known world, Egyptian medical treatises describing surgeries and herbal remedies, Babylonian star charts tracking the movements of the heavens across millennia, Indian mathematical formulas that hinted at infinity, Greek philosophical works that tried to define the meaning of existence, and histories of forgotten kingdoms whose names no one now remembers, all gathered in one place because a king once believed that knowledge was more powerful than armies. That king was Ptolemy I, the successor of Alexander the Great, who founded the library in the 3rd century before Christ with a radical idea that humanity's greatest treasure was not gold or land but understanding. And so he ordered every ship that entered Alexandria to surrender its books. He had them copied, then kept the originals, turning the city into an intellectual empire that consumed the written world. Scholars were invited from Greece, Persia, Judea, Nubia, India, and beyond, paid by the state to think, to debate, to observe, to record. And for centuries, Alexandria became the mind of humanity, a place where Eratosthenes measured the circumference of the earth using nothing but shadows and geometry, where Heron built machines powered by steam nearly 2,000 years before such things would be rediscovered, where physicians studied the human body with a precision that would be lost to Europe for more than 1,000 years, where engineers designed machines that could lift massive stones and channel water across cities, and where philosophers asked questions about morality, consciousness, and the nature of reality that still haunt us today. But knowledge has always frightened power, because once people understand the world, they become harder to control. And Alexandria stood at the crossroads of empires, as Rome grew hungrier and Egypt grew weaker. Cleopatra struggled to hold her kingdom together, while Roman generals fought over the future of the Mediterranean. And in 48 BC, Julius Caesar brought his civil war to Alexandria's shores, his fleet trapped in the harbor, his enemies closing in. So he ordered his ships burned to deny them to his rivals, never imagining that the flames would leap from vessel to vessel, from dock to warehouse, from street to street, until they reached the storehouses of the library, where thousands of scrolls waited stacked in fragile towers of papyrus and parchment. And as the fire reached them, they burned with a terrible speed, releasing the thoughts of dead civilizations into the air as smoke, words dissolving into nothing, histories vanishing in moments. And although the main library may not have been completely destroyed that night, the wound was fatal because it marked the beginning of a slow and relentless erasure, one that would continue for centuries as the political and religious tides of the world shifted. Because the library was not just a building, it was an idea that all knowledge was worth preserving, that no single culture owned truth, and that idea did not survive well in a world that was becoming more divided, more certain, more intolerant, as Christianity spread across the Roman Empire. The old pagan texts preserved in Alexandria were no longer seen as neutral records of human thought. They were seen as threats, as dangerous whispers from a past that challenged the new order. And in 391 AD, every view, every like, Every subscription helps us pull one more voice out of the darkness. So take a second and subscribe. Let's continue with the story. When Emperor Theodosius outlawed pagan worship, Christian mobs led by Bishop Theophilus stormed the great temple that housed much of what remained of the library, smashing statues, tearing down altars, and ripping through shelves of ancient books, burning works by philosophers, astronomers, and scientists who worshipped gods that were now forbidden, not because the books were false, but because they were inconvenient, because they did not fit the story that power wanted to tell. And yet, even after that, fragments of Alexandria's knowledge survived, hidden in private collections, copied by scholars who understood their value, whispered about in secret, until the final blow came in the 7th century, when Muslim armies conquered Egypt and Alexandria fell. And although historians still debate exactly what happened next, later Islamic writers tell a story of Caliph Umar ordering the remaining books destroyed, saying that if they agreed with the Quran, they were unnecessary, and if they disagreed, they were dangerous. A chillingly simple logic that erased centuries of human thought in a single sentence. And whether the bathhouses of Alexandria were truly heated by burning manuscripts for months, or whether the destruction was more gradual, the outcome was the same. The last echoes of the greatest library the world had ever known vanished into smoke and silence, leaving humanity with only fragments of what once existed. And what we lost is almost impossible to imagine, because the Library of Alexandria was not just preserving what we already know today. It was preserving things we have never rediscovered, ancient engineering techniques that could have changed the course of technology, medical knowledge that might have saved millions from disease, historical records that could have rewritten our understanding of who we are and where we came from, astronomical observations that might have revealed patterns we still do not see, and philosophical works that might have answered questions we still struggle with. But instead of inheriting all of that, we inherited a broken mirror, scattered pieces of a vast reflection, and we spent the next 1,000 years rebuilding knowledge that had already once existed. The Renaissance, the scientific revolution, the modern world, all of it was humanity painfully rediscovering what had been lost. Not because our ancestors were stupid, but because their voices were burned. And this is the true tragedy of Alexandria. Not just that books were destroyed, but that an entire civilization's intellectual momentum was shattered, sending humanity into centuries of darkness and ignorance. And even now, when archaeologists dig beneath the modern city of Alexandria, they find traces of what once was: charred papyrus fragments, broken shelves, collapsed halls, silent witnesses to a crime that no one was ever punished for. And sometimes, when you stand on those ruins, you can almost feel it, the weight of all the voices that once filled those halls, arguing, calculating, dreaming, believing that knowledge would outlive them. And in a way, they were right. Because even though the library was destroyed, its spirit survived in the fragments that were copied elsewhere, in the ideas that spread beyond its walls, in the stubborn human desire to understand the world. But we should never forget the cost, because Alexandria was not lost to time. It was destroyed by fear, by power, by the refusal to let people think freely. And that same danger still exists today. Whenever books are banned, whenever history is rewritten, whenever truth is silenced because it is inconvenient, we are standing once again at the doors of the library, watching the flames creep closer. And the story of Alexandria is not just a story about the ancient world. It is a warning to ours that knowledge is fragile, that memory can be erased, and that the greatest crime is not to be wrong. but to destroy the evidence of what might have been. And somewhere beneath the dust and the ruins of a city that has been rebuilt 1,000 times, the ghosts of Alexandria still whisper, reminding us that humanity once held the universe in its hands and let it burn. And those whispers grow louder when we look at what followed, because after the Library of Alexandria vanished, the world did not suddenly become ignorant, but it became fragmented, scattered, like a shattered mirror where each culture held only a few broken pieces of what had once been a complete reflection of reality. And in the centuries that followed, knowledge survived in monasteries, in Islamic libraries, in Chinese courts, in Indian universities, but it no longer spoke to itself in one great conversation the way it once had in Alexandria. And this loss changed the direction of history in ways that can never be measured, because ideas are not just information. They are catalysts. They collide, they merge, they inspire revolutions. And when you isolate them, when you scatter them, you slow the evolution of human thought. And so, while the world stumbled through plagues, wars, and dark ages, the ghosts of Alexandria lingered like a missing heartbeat, because somewhere in those lost scrolls were answers to problems that would kill millions centuries later. Answers to questions that scientists would spend lifetimes rediscovering. And when we speak of progress today, of technology, of medicine, of astronomy, we are walking a road that might have been paved thousands of years earlier if the library had survived. And yet it was not ignorance alone that destroyed it. It was fear, fear of ideas that challenged authority, fear of knowledge that could not be controlled, because every empire, whether Roman, Christian, or Islamic, believed that it alone held the truth, and anything that contradicted it was not just wrong, it was dangerous. And so Alexandria became a casualty of certainty, a victim of people who believed too strongly that they already knew everything worth knowing. And in the centuries after its destruction, myths began to grow around it, legends of hidden vaults, of secret tunnels beneath the city where scrolls were still waiting to be found, of survivors who carried fragments of its wisdom to distant lands. And while many of these stories are romantic exaggerations, they speak to something deeply human, the refusal to accept that something so magnificent could truly be gone forever. Because the idea that we once held so much knowledge and let it slip through our fingers is almost unbearable. And yet history is filled with such losses. Libraries burned in Baghdad, universities destroyed in Nalanda, archives erased in China, memory after memory sacrificed to power. And Alexandria stands as the greatest of them all, not because it was the only one, but because it was the first time humanity tried to gather everything it knew in one place, to create a collective mind, a shared memory that belonged to everyone. And when that was destroyed, every view, every like, every subscription helps us pull one more voice out of the darkness. So take a second and subscribe. Let's continue with the story. We did not just lose information. We lost the dream that knowledge could unite us, and even today, in an age where we believe we have access to all the world's information at our fingertips, the story of Alexandria warns us how fragile that illusion is, because data can be deleted, histories can be rewritten, and truth can be buried as easily now as it was 2,000 years ago. And when archaeologists search the ruins of Alexandria, they are not just looking for stones and papyrus. They are looking for proof that humanity once valued wisdom above power, that we once believed that understanding the universe was more important than controlling it. And sometimes they find tantalizing hints, fragments of text, references in other works, shadows of books that no longer exist, like the writings of Manetho on Egyptian history, or the lost volumes of Aristotle, or the ancient atlases that mapped the world as it was before ice ages reshaped the continents. And each fragment is a reminder of the vast ocean of knowledge that disappeared, because for every page we have, there are thousands we do not, and those missing pages haunt our understanding of the past, because history is written by those who survive. And the Library of Alexandria was the greatest survivor of the ancient world until it was silenced. And in that silence, entire civilizations were erased from memory. Their stories never told, their achievements never celebrated, and their mistakes never learned from. And so we walk through history blind to countless lessons, repeating cycles of violence, intolerance, and destruction that might have been avoided if we had remembered. And this is perhaps the most tragic irony of all, that the very knowledge that could have helped humanity become wiser, kinder, and more just was destroyed by those who believed they were protecting truth. And as you listen to this story, as you imagine the flames consuming scroll after scroll, you are not just witnessing an ancient tragedy, you are seeing a mirror of our own world. Because the battle between knowledge and power never ended, it only changed its shape. And the spirit of Alexandria lives on in every library, every archive, every attempt to preserve truth against the forces that would erase it. And yet its ghost also lives on in every censored book, every silenced voice, every forgotten history, reminding us that the greatest danger to civilization is not ignorance, but the deliberate destruction of understanding. And somewhere in the ruins of a city that once called itself the capital of the world, the echoes of scholars still linger, whispering equations, stories, dreams, and discoveries into the wind, waiting for a future that might one day be ready to listen again. And perhaps the most haunting thing about the Library of Alexandria is not what we know about it, but what we will never know, because every civilization measures itself by the stories it preserves. And Alexandria was the one place where those stories came together, where Egyptian priests who memorized the movements of the stars could sit beside Greek philosophers who questioned the nature of reality, where Persian physicians shared herbal cures with Indian mathematicians who wrote about zero and infinity, where Jewish scholars recorded ancient genealogies and Babylonian astronomers charted eclipses that had occurred centuries before their own births. And this fusion of minds created something that has never truly existed again: a global conversation, a unified attempt to understand the universe not through the lens of one culture, but through the collective curiosity of humanity itself. And when that was destroyed, the world did not just lose facts, it lost perspective. It lost the ability to see itself as a single story instead of 1,000 warring ones. And that loss can still be felt today, in the way we struggle to reconcile science with belief, in the way nations cling to their own versions of history, in the way truth itself has become something to be fought over rather than shared. And Alexandria stands as the silent origin of that fracture, because before it fell, knowledge flowed freely between cultures. Ideas traveled faster than armies, and curiosity was rewarded rather than punished. But after its destruction, knowledge became something to be guarded, controlled, and filtered through the ideologies of those in power. And this shift changed the course of civilization, because progress thrives on openness, on the free exchange of ideas. And when that exchange was broken, humanity entered a long winter of intellectual isolation. And even though great thinkers still emerged, they did so in relative darkness, often unaware that the answers they sought had already been written centuries before in scrolls that were now ash, And imagine for a moment what it would mean if those scrolls still existed. If we could read the complete works of ancient engineers who built machines that harnessed steam and water. If we could study medical texts that described surgeries and treatments lost to time. If we could examine star charts that recorded the heavens over thousands of years, giving us a clearer picture of the universe's slow and subtle changes. If we could learn from histories that told the stories of civilizations wiped from the map by conquest and disaster, and how different our world might be if that knowledge had been passed down intact. If the Renaissance had begun not in the 15th century, but in the first. If the scientific revolution had not had to rediscover the foundations of mathematics, astronomy, and physics, but could have built upon them. If humanity had not spent centuries relearning what it had already once known. And this is why Alexandria is not just a historical curiosity. It is a wound, a scar on the timeline of progress, because it represents a moment when the trajectory of human potential was violently altered. And we will never truly know how far ahead we might be today if that library had survived. And yet, even in its destruction, Alexandria left behind something powerful, a warning, because it showed us what happens when fear is allowed to decide what knowledge is acceptable, when ideology determines what truths are allowed to exist, and when power values control over understanding. And those forces did not disappear with the ancient world. They are still with us, in every regime that censors information, in every movement that burns books, in every attempt to rewrite history to suit the present. And so the story of Alexandria is not over. It is still being written, because every generation faces the same choice: to preserve knowledge or to destroy it, to seek truth or to fear it, to build libraries or to light fires. And somewhere beneath the modern streets of Alexandria, beneath the noise of traffic and the weight of centuries, the ruins of the old library still lie buried, a silent testament to both the heights humanity can reach and the depths to which it can fall. And if you listen closely, you might imagine the voices of the scholars who once walked those halls, debating, dreaming, believing that what they were doing mattered, believing that their words would echo into the future, and in a way, they were right. Because even though their books were burned, their spirits survived, in every scientist who seeks to understand the universe, in every historian who tries to piece together the past, in every reader who believes that knowledge is worth protecting. And that is the final, bittersweet legacy of the Library of Alexandria. That even in its destruction, it gave us a story that still challenges us, still warns us, and still asks us a simple, haunting question: what will we choose to preserve? And what will we allow to be forgotten? And that question lingers like smoke in the air, because the ruins of Alexandria are not just ancient stones. They are a mirror held up to every generation that follows, asking whether we have learned anything at all. Because history has shown again and again that when fear takes control, when leaders feel threatened by ideas they cannot dominate, knowledge becomes the first casualty. And the same patterns that destroyed the library can be seen throughout time. In the burning of Mayan codices by Spanish conquistadors, in the destruction of Baghdad's House of Wisdom by invading Mongols, in the Nazi book burnings of the 20th century, and in every modern attempt to erase inconvenient truths from public memory. And this makes Alexandria more than a tragedy of the past. It makes it a living warning, a reminder that civilization is only as strong as its willingness to remember. And perhaps this is why the story of the library continues to captivate us, because it speaks to a deep and universal fear, the fear that everything we know, everything we have learned, everything we have built, could vanish in a moment of madness, leaving future generations to stumble through the darkness, piecing together fragments of what once was, just as we have done with the ancient world. And when you imagine the scholars of Alexandria bent over their scrolls by lamplight, carefully copying texts, debating ideas, and recording their observations of the stars, it is impossible not to feel a profound sense of loss. Because those people were not so different from us. They were curious, ambitious, hopeful, and they believed that knowledge was a gift that should be passed on, not destroyed. And yet they lived in a world where power ultimately decided what survived. And so their work, their lives, and their dreams were swallowed by forces far beyond their control. And still, their legacy endures in subtle ways. In the foundations of modern science, in the fragments of ancient texts that were preserved elsewhere, in the very idea of a library as a place where the world's knowledge is gathered and protected. And perhaps the greatest tribute we can pay to Alexandria is not to mourn what was lost, but to fight for what remains, to protect the truth wherever it is threatened, to preserve the stories of those who came before us, and to ensure that the mistakes of the past are not repeated. Because if the Library of Alexandria teaches us anything, it is that progress is fragile, that memory is precious, and that the line between enlightenment and oblivion is far thinner than we like to believe. And as the centuries continue to turn, as new technologies rise and old ones fade, as new empires are built and old ones crumble, the spirit of Alexandria waits quietly in the background, reminding us that the greatest treasure humanity has ever possessed is not something that can be held in the hand, but something that lives in the mind. And it is up to us to decide whether that treasure will be preserved or burned, remembered or forgotten. Because somewhere in the ashes of the world's first great library lies a simple truth: that knowledge is the soul of civilization, and when we destroy it, we destroy a part of ourselves. If you enjoyed the video, hit that subscribe button and give it a thumbs up, and share with us your favorite historical tales you want to hear about in the comments.